Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap. I'm really excited about this one. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can before the end of today's webinar. Also happening at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is DevOps Security Monitoring and Compliance. Our speakers today are Eric Carter, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Sysdig, and David Muir, who is Principal Solutions Architect at Red Hat Security ISVs. And I think I mispronounced that, even though you had such a great meme. No one fewer. What? How did it go? You have to tell me.
None fewer than Dave Muir.
There it is. I love that. I love that. So no, welcome, gentlemen. I did great. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I do want to thank both of you for joining me today. And I know we've got a great webinar on tap. So I am going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and let you guys get right to it.
Yeah, thanks, Charlene. So I'll start off the conversation. I'll give you about 10-15 minutes of Red Hat, and then I'll hand it over to Eric, who will talk a little bit more about the really cool stuff with Sysdig and give you all a demo. And want to just thank everybody for joining today to talk about DevOps security, compliance, and monitoring. I wanted to start off the conversation by looking at the risks. If you attempted to implement the community version of Kubernetes in an enterprise, some of you know it's actually not that hard to download and install Kubernetes, but actually getting it ready for production to run business critical applications for an enterprise, it takes a lot more. There are a number of things that you would need to piece together. You need to test things, harden it for it really to be production ready. And so the risk with trying to get the community version of Kubernetes done right is shown in this number, the 75% number about stalled adoption rate. It basically will never leave your lab environment, see the light of day in production. Of course, we wouldn't want to see that to happen to something as great as Kubernetes. And Red Hat has spent the last 5 years with both the open source community and our customers getting Kubernetes right. The result is what you see here on this slide. It's a supported, trusted enterprise Kubernetes platform. And I just want to repeat something there. OpenShift is Kubernetes. But with all of these out-of-the-box additional services that you see here, as well as hundreds of defect and performance fixes, it's over 200 plus validated integrations, and you continuously get things like security patches. And this is the value of Red Hat and OpenShift. And so now that you have the platform taken care of, you can start thinking about the rest of your DevOps solution and how best to secure all of it. Of course, the platform is secure, you have OpenShift, but what about the security vulnerabilities and things like your containers during CI/CD, or if you have the right policies in place for regulatory compliance, or if your apps are behaving appropriately? This kind of becomes a bit difficult to get your hands around. So one of the things we've recently done at Red Hat with the help of our partners like Sysdig is to define a taxonomy of security categories and methods. And the intent of this is to really make this thing called DevSecOps a lot easier for our customers to consume, as they're transforming their business over to containers, the cloud, and DevOps. And this allows us then to take these security methods and map them at their integration points in a DevOps pipeline. So you can understand where you're covered with Red Hat's platform and where you might need to extend and enhance Red Hat's functionality with our partners like Sysdig. So in this case, you can see Red Hat has you fully covered with a secure and hardened platform. OpenShift has some networking capabilities like CNI plugins. There's default network policies. We can encrypt the etcd data at rest. There's some API management with 3-scale, and Red Hat has some SEA vulnerability capabilities in its dependency analytics IDE plugin, which is found in Red Hat Code Ready workspaces. Now, Sysdig extends and enhances Red Hat's functionality by providing capabilities like SCA and image risk and compliance management, runtime analysis and monitoring at the various integration points you see here in the pipeline. And of course, Eric will dive into those features more in a bit, right after I cover some more of the features of OpenShift. Now, all these features have been designed with security in mind. It all starts with the container host, which of course is Red Hat Enterprise Linux and CoreOS. And so in order to secure containers at the boundaries and help you protect the host from container escapes, you'll want to look at the 4 red pillars in the diagram to the right. This is SELinux to provide mandatory access controls, namespaces for multi-tenancy. You've got secure computing mode that allows you to control your system calls, and control groups, which allow you to isolate resources usage, things like CPU and memory. And once you have a handle on those 4 features, you can then start to dive into the additional features that you see on the left. And I won't have time to cover all of these features, but I did want to double click on the ones most relevant to our discussion today with Sysdig. So the first is SELinux. And one of the best ways to achieve a defense in depth strategy, especially for zero-day vulnerabilities, is to keep SELinux enabled, which is the command set enforce one. And yes, you can absolutely purchase t-shirts to show your support of SELinux. All the cool kids are doing it, like this young man you see here. And you too will be mitigating container runtime vulnerabilities like the examples we see on the slide. But it's basically done by enforcing a labeling system that provides mandatory access controls on every process and every operating system object. So if you think about a container process being hacked and escaped into the host system, trying to run a program in the host somewhere, SELinux would prevent it because the container process has a different label than the program on the host. It's a lot more than that, but that's it at its high level. Now, the important thing to point out related to this talk is SELinux is on by default in OpenShift's operating system. And so one of the ways to see this is through security context constraints, or as they're called upstream in Kubernetes, pod security policies. This feature controls permissions for pods. You can use SCCs to define a set of conditions that a pod must run with it in order for it to be accepted in the cluster. It's like admission control. In the example that you see here, this is a restricted SEC in OpenShift. It's the default SELinux config for OpenShift projects. You can see that pods cannot run as privileged, nor can they access the host network or ports. And so the purpose of these SECs is to really limit the ability of the container to negatively impact the operating system. Now, the operating system can either be Red Hat Enterprise Linux or CoreOS. RHEL CoreOS is the default operating system for worker nodes. It is based on RHEL, and it's optimized for a container operating system. It's optimized because of these 3 things. It's immutable, it's self-updating, and it's booted from container images itself. It only contains the packages needed to run OpenShift. And the great thing is this is all installed and managed by OpenShift, so it allows your admins to work on more important things. Now, there are times when configuration changes are needed to the host, and so Red Hat OpenShift handles that through the machine config operator. So you can change the configurations of some of the items listed here, like kubelet, the registries, SSH, and CRI-O. And CRI-O, by the way, is the lightweight, stable, and simple container runtime engine that ships with OpenShift. So another security feature that comes with OpenShift is cluster logging. An OpenShift cluster admin can deploy logging, which will aggregate all the logs from your cluster, like system and application logs. You can deploy a full open source EFK stack through the Elasticsearch and cluster logging operator from the operator hub right within OpenShift. And this includes Elasticsearch, which is the analytics engine, FluentD that aggregates all the logs, and then Kibana, which is the web UI. Now, of course, there are access controls, so the cluster admins can see all logs, and then users can only see logs in their projects. And you can always leverage another logging stack or send logs to an external scene by configuring FluentD. Now, you can't go too far after a logging discussion without hearing about monitoring. And by default, OpenShift installs and configures cluster monitoring out of the box. Once again, it's all based on open source projects. And this time it's Prometheus, which handles the metrics collection, and then Grafana, which shows you all the nice, pretty graphs of all the metrics. And so with OpenShift cluster monitoring, you'll be able to view things like etcd, the image registry, the Kubernetes API server, and many other kube objects. All right, so one of the main topics for today's webinar is compliance. And we've been talking about some great OpenShift security features that are added on top of Kubernetes. But how do you ensure that these features in the platform meet specific compliance guidelines? Well, as you can see here, Red Hat has done a lot of work in the industry, from a NIST checklist to FISMA deployments to the payment card industry requirements. All of these are available online, easily searchable, but you can see that these guides are currently for OpenShift 3x. However, Red Hat has been working directly with the Center for Internet Security to create a guide for OpenShift 4. Now, you all may know there is a guide for Kubernetes 1.15, which you can absolutely use on OpenShift 4, but this guide is specifically for OpenShift. And right now it's in a CIS-inspired sort of draft stage, but I wanted to give everyone a preview of what that'll contain. So if we look at the bottom, here's an example recommendation, which is to ensure that the API server pod spec file permissions are 644 or more restrictive. And so the folks at Red Hat and CIS provide things like guidance on the recommendation, the actual audit command using OC, and what the output should look like. And of course, our teams are validating each command, which by the way is the hardest part of this whole effort. But you'll see recommendations for all the major kube components, which are shown on the top here, like the control and worker node configs, API server, etcd, and kubelet. Now there's a lot of commands to run, excuse me, and analyze. And while we're providing the answers in this static document, you'll really want to automate these checks and continuously monitor them, which is exactly what Sysdig can do for you. So speaking about policy automation and management, the folks at Sysdig have been quite busy with their integration into one of Red Hat's latest announced products called Advanced Cluster Management for Kubernetes. I'll talk about that integration in a second, but just to give you a little bit about ACM, here are a couple points. It's basically a single pane for all your kube clusters. Basically, you can create, update, delete clusters across clouds, private, public. It also allows you to easily deploy applications at scale, visualize the relationships across those clusters, and from a security perspective, you'll be able to centrally set and enforce policies like the SECs we just talked about to all your clusters. And of course, this control and visibility solves a lot of DevOps scale challenges as you continue to evolve and mature in your DevOps footprint. And so to further enhance ACM security capabilities, Sysdig has provided an integration with their open source Falco project and commercial product Sysdig Secure. This integration provides an advanced cluster management policy which automates the deployment of either Falco or Sysdig Secure across all your clusters. And of course, Eric will obviously do a much better job of explaining Sysdig, all the features that it has, but to give you a quick newbie perspective on Falco and ACM, you can see it can address things like IDS, FIM, and audit requirements. And there are built-in rules that can be extended with the community source rule sets as well. This all provides runtime security tool features that can detect unexpected network and contain your activity, file modifications, and app behavior. Well, that actually does it for me. I hope you learned a little bit about OpenShift and security. Hope this helps you get a much better Kubernetes adoption rate in your enterprise. And I will now pass it over to Eric, who will complete this DevSecOps solution with the capabilities of Sysdig. So I will give Eric presenter mode here.
All right, and I will work on sharing my screen. But thanks for that, Dave. That's a good introduction, and you did great talking about Falco and advanced cluster management. We're pretty excited about that and the capabilities that that brings to help us centralize, really centralize some of the security findings that we have that are on a container Kubernetes network level, like you said, and pull them into that centralized interface. So, okay, show my screen. I'm going to start here, just where you left off. And so I'll do a little bit of description of where we're at and what we see around security, compliance, and monitoring. And then I do want to jump into the products for just a moment toward the end, just to give you a feel and a flavor. We won't go too deep, but let me start out here with this particular slide, which is really about depicting the challenge before you as DevOps professionals, and we can call this the sort of emergence to secure DevOps or DevSecOps. The bottom line is where once upon a time, a lot of your focus really was around the health and performance and things of the applications and really observing that, managing capacity and troubleshooting things. More and more, the DevOps role is being asked to participate in the security side of things. So identifying vulnerabilities and threats in and around the environment, kind of communicating developers with operations people, understanding what is it that's happening, what do we need to fix, auditing things for compliance, what's happening in this environment. And when something bad happens, kind of triaging those things. And so, you may not have fancied yourself a security professional, but basically at this point, we can argue that you are now. And the bottom line is you have a lot more responsibility. And so getting to the core of these functions as a job, you really need the right set of tools to help you along the way and along the path to bring the insights that you need to quickly understand whether it's performance, whether it's security, and then digging into issues to help solve them. And when we think about this kind of concept of DevOps workflows or secure DevOps workflows, you'll recognize many of these, but we think about them on a continuum between Red Hat and between Sysdig and sort of DevOps folks. Here are the things that you're thinking about, right? So where we're building applications, we're getting them ready to put out into production. We are responsible for scanning images, looking for vulnerabilities, making sure those things are up to date. We're fixing the high severity ones, or trying to protect our business even before we kick anything into running on the OpenShift platform. Now we're running, and we need to be able to monitor the things that are running, whether that's the containers and the Kubernetes or OpenShift platform itself. And again, Dave mentioned how OpenShift is shipping, or Red Hat is shipping with OpenShift Prometheus to help you with that, but also apps, cloud services monitoring, right? The heart of what you're delivering on the platform that's customer facing, as an example. You want to be able to understand how those things are working. You want to be able to secure those things at runtime. So 0-day threats, things you couldn't have known about, but now someone is tampering and you want to be able to catch those things, looking for those anomalies, and the best you can, executing on threat prevention. Part of what Dave described in pod security policies is all about threat prevention by only allowing pods to run that have the right configurations and settings, right? And of course, when something happens, and performance issues will occur, potentially, activity that we might consider a security risk will occur, and we want to be able to troubleshoot those things, perform sort of forensics, an incident response workflow. How do you make that as efficient as possible and then have compliance, running throughout, right? And we'll show you a little bit about how Sysdig does that today. But these are kind of the essential workflows, right, that you need to be taking control of. And the goal here between Red Hat with OpenShift and Sysdig with the secure DevOps platform is to provide you a way to easily automate much of this and kind of get on with the job, as Dave said, about doing more important things, such as developing the right applications. So if you look at Sysdig and kind of who we are and what we do, We have what we call the Secure DevOps platform. You can think about this as kind of the things on the right. We're helping you to embed security and validate compliance across that entire spectrum, build, run, respond, to be able to understand what's happening from a health and performance perspective, to maximize that performance, to maximize the availability, make sure that things are up and running, right? OpenShift is going to do a lot of that for you just by the nature of orchestration. When things are breaking, we can help you find those things, fix those things. At the end of the day, what that means is getting results quickly. Much of what we do, like Red Hat with OpenShift built on open source, you can sort of see those projects in the middle of the pie over there on the left-hand side. Anchor for image scanning, Prometheus, much we do around metrics there, Falco for runtime security, and of course Sysdig began as open source and is still going strong as a troubleshooting tool for containers and Linux. So at the end of the day, I think Dave and I could declare the same goal, whether we're thinking about OpenShift or Sysdig. It's to help you ship cloud apps faster, right? And to make sure that you're doing that with a secure platform and giving the tools that give you insight together, whether that's monitoring or security or both. So I will show some of these things in the demo, but I just wanted to step through kind of, again, part of this is about the workflows, part of this is about how Sysdig does it, right? So identifying and blocking vulnerabilities. A lot of things can happen when we're building our containers. Maybe we started, a while ago, and some of the code now has got known vulnerabilities. We want to be able to scan those things for both OS and non-OS type of issues. And by that, I mean, we may, be using RHEL and there's some known vulnerability that we should fix, but we also may have configuration issues, like we're running that container as root, and perhaps that's not the right approach, or there are things like secrets and passwords and things that are inside of that we can help you detect, understand that that's happening, and then give you an opportunity to fix those things. So whether that's happening at the registry level, or better, kind of pulling it further left into your CI/CD pipeline. So whether that's something like Jenkins, and we have a plugin for Jenkins that lets you see those things right there as a developer within your Jenkins tooling and know what needs to be addressed. So doing that in your CI/CD pipelines in the registries, it's important before you move to production to check for those kinds of things. And now, as Dave was mentioning, there's a lot of things that go into compliance. Sometimes part of that is just rules that you set around image scanning, but also this idea of CIS benchmarks, right? And there's Docker Bench, there's Kubebench, and what Dave was describing was something that's very specific to OpenShift. And inside of Sysdig, we basically help you automate the running of these things and provide you the ability to kind of measure and report on how am I doing against best practices, right? And give you kind of the green, yellow, red that really lets you see, okay, where do I need to improve? What am I doing well at? And this goes across different configurations depending on what you're checking. And then one of the things that we've done is kind of include the remediation information that's provided as a part of these benchmarks, so that you can look and say, what do I need to do to turn this green? So it's as simple as that. And I think that is very helpful to automate this and have it run. And one of the unique things that Sysdig can help you do is then report on how am I doing? How am I doing over time? And that's the benefit of having both the compliance security checks as well as the ability to do monitoring and dashboarding, right? Is to say, it's getting better, it's getting worse. If I'm under an audit situation, I can actually roll this out and say, look, increasingly we have been doing better and better and better against securing this environment, making sure it's compliant and so on. So it's something to think about in terms of tooling that helps you to not only understand how you're doing, but have proof of that. Now we're running in production. We talked about runtime protection. We talked about a little bit about Falco as this open source rules engine. And the community has done a great job of contributing sort of the most important, the things that we're concerned about that keep us up at night when it comes to containers running in production against a Kubernetes environment, against our container runtime. And so what we're doing at Sysdig is kind of giving you out of the box those same policies with the ability to turn them on or off, and to detect various runtime behavior, whether that's network activity, file activity, things like terminal shells running in a container, and then to be able to apply remediation actions. You can kill a container, stop it, pause it, those kind of things. And then one unique thing that we do is to help create a capture file of all that activity before, during, and after. So consider that oftentimes containers start and stop, and along with it went the information that you potentially needed to prove or to understand what it is that happened. So these forensic captures can help you go back in, examine during an incident what took place, find out what was touched, so on and so forth. It's very powerful in terms of getting to the heart of the matter. And here are some of the policies that we'll see in a moment in the product. So I won't read through all these, but a lot of words here that might keep us up at night: suspicious activity, sensitive info, exfiltration, and so on. Auditing activity is another key thing here to do. And the great news here is we're tapping into things like Kubernetes audit log to help give you this information, right? So you can understand during an incident, what was it that happened? What was the kubectl kind of activity that happened in commands and networks, right? And what this does is help you when you are trying to become SOC 2 compliant or prove PCI and so on, to have, again, the controls in place, the intelligence, the information at your fingertips that really help you achieve these compliance standards. And so pretty powerful way to understand at a granular level what's happening. And one of the cool things that we do here is that because we're communicating with OpenShift, we're adding context so that potentially I'm the Java app owner and I want to be able to go in and see just at that Java app project or namespace level, what was it that was happening, and having a look at that and trying to understand how to prevent it in the future. Dave mentioned Prometheus, and I'll try and show you some of this during the demo. But one of the things, the power of Prometheus for monitoring cloud native apps is clear to Sysdig, and so we've embraced it as a sort of de facto metric standard. And one of the things that we can help you with is, as you're extending and growing your environments, the idea that we can help scale the back end. So if you have a lot of clusters, a lot of metrics, and you need to do that across clusters and clouds, you can continue to do Prometheus, but have Sysdig as sort of your back end to ingest millions of metrics and retain that for you long term to do trending and analysis and so on, and to be able to troubleshoot really in real time. I mean, 10-second resolution is very quick, very fast. And then one of the things that we've done is not just say, okay, we can pull in those metrics, but we have actually tooled the Sysdig monitor solution to let you do things like use PromQL queries, so that many of you who are using that Prometheus query language want to be able to calculate very precise metrics that are meaningful for you, for your business, and even graph those on Grafana dashboards. So all that is supported, even though it's Sysdig that's really the engine that's helping you drive the metric collection and display. So it's important for us to make sure that if you're a Prometheus user and you opt to use Sysdig, that you have that same experience. And then of course, we make it easy. Sysdig first and foremost is a SaaS platform. We also do on-prem, but the SaaS nature of it means that by just using our Sysdig operator for OpenShift, you can deploy very quickly, and you're up and running in 5 minutes or less, getting metrics and information and security and all the things that we're talking about here. So we'll try and take a look at that shortly in the demo. There are a few just screenshots. Again, we'll look at both looking at things through Sysdig as well as through Grafana and being able to run those PromQL queries. So let's just take a look at a quick use case. Then I'm going to tell you about a customer story and then into the demo. So using security and monitoring together, why does this make sense? Well, here's an example, right? Someone is reporting a slowdown in service performance. Maybe it's end user community that's doing that. We want to ID what's the problem, right? And from the monitoring perspective, that may look like a CPU spike, right? So some things are happening where CPU is increased, maybe my file activity is increased, and I get a notification in PagerDuty or Slack. Now, maybe that's what it looks like on the monitoring or the performance side, but on the security side, that same incident uncovers that it's someone running a shell in a container, that they're touching files and they're doing things that potentially not only are an issue for our business, but violate the standards we're trying to measure ourselves against, like PCI. So we want to understand, okay, so I've got something happening here that's impacting me on many fronts. Where did it occur, right? And so what we can do, because these things work together, a single source of truth, you're getting the information. This is all happening in my store DB namespace, same container. I really need to understand and take action on this particular issue. So again, security and monitoring come together. And then why did it happen? So the commonality of this information, and again, those capture files for forensics that I told you about, those are things that you can dig into to now look at commands, file activity, all those good things to understand and protect yourself and prevent it from happening in the future. So let's talk about a customer who has done this. And you know, Ford Motor Company needs no introduction. Actually, they were recognized earlier this year as a part of the kind of virtual online Red Hat Summit as an industry. They received an industry award as a leader in this space. So you think about a 100-year-old car company who is now leveraging microservices and OpenShift and driving a lot more applications into containers. And one of the great things that they did is that they brought together the different practice areas within their business: platform engineering, app dev, service owner, security and compliance, and they gathered the requirements that were necessary or that they felt were important for this project in moving toward containers. And they had actually done containers previously, and they were doing it for sort of, let's call them stateless apps. So the stakes were a little bit lower, the data was less, critical. They were just processing and doing things like that. But now they were shifting to stateful apps, sort of business critical things, and they needed to make kind of accommodations for that, but they also were having that same goal. We know that we can ship apps faster so that we can be more competitive, whether it's across something that's happening in the vehicle, corporate related or whatnot, right? And they were concerned about managing everything effectively. And so what was the solution? I mean, they really sat down and said, we need a secure container platform. So think about all the things that Dave talked about in the beginning: security at every level of the stack, role-based access control, secret management, encryption, and so on, right? So all of these things were key for them and basically encouraged them to make the choice of OpenShift versus taking an off-the-shelf open source Kubernetes distribution and working with that, right? Along with that, they knew that they needed to augment the monitoring and security for what they were doing, and they chose Sysdig for both of those kind of Uber use cases, again, of monitoring and security, doing that across their CI/CD and production. In other words, doing things like image scanning with Jenkins, which they do a lot of, being able to see things from a Kubernetes perspective, metrics, alerts, troubleshooting, and so on. All the things we'll look at. At the end of the day, what were they able to do? And this is really where it is impressive. When they looked at how they had to provision applications prior to this new platform and working with containers, between getting storage and networking and a VM, or maybe it's a bare metal host, all those things, and prepping that just to roll out a new application would take them upwards of 3 months. Now that they have the platform in place, code is ready, we kick it into the OpenShift platform and we're up and running in 3 minutes. We can iterate on that hourly, daily, as often as we'd like without disturbing kind of the running of that application, requiring quite a few, let's say, less admins to make sure that all this is up and running. They've reduced hardware costs. In fact, when they started this project, the way they started it as a pilot is they went and got some hardware that was already being retired out of the data center. They used it, they installed OpenShift on it, and they were up and running and actually getting quite good performance and getting more life out of the gear, because part of this is the magic of, hey, if something fails, don't worry, OpenShift will orchestrate to the other nodes in that cluster and make sure that things are running. So now they have confidence in the platform. They have freedom to experiment. So they're onboarding different business units very, very quickly, and they're worried a lot less about breaking something because they have much more control in this environment. So an excellent case study. You can jump out, and I think we'll give you the link at the end. Jump out and see what they're up to at Ford in one of the videos that was produced for that award that they won. All right, so at this point, I believe I'm going to jump in just quickly to the demo. I'm going to do a quick time check. We're looking okay there. All right, so let me bounce over here. And if Dave, if your audio is on, you can let me know if that's showing up fine for you.
Yeah, all look good.
Excellent. Okay, so what are we looking at? This is Sysdig's kind of instance of OpenShift container platform in our demo environment. I'm just sitting on the home dashboard. I am not going to do a full-on OpenShift demo, but I did want to kind of show you a few things. And one is that I can get an administrator view or I can get a developer view here, and I kind of see the things that would be more important to me depending on my role. As we jump into the Sysdig side of the demo, what you're going to see are these projects showing up from a monitoring and security perspective. And so these are all things that have been provisioned and are running out on the OpenShift platform, right? And you can create new projects here just by clicking a button. So what Dave talked about is some of the removing some of the complexity of owning and operating Kubernetes. A lot of that comes into play here. And then we can also do things like look at the pods that are out there running and kind of get a real granular view of all the things that I might want to either A, create, or B, keep an eye on. Now, one of the cool things before we jump over into Sysdig is this idea that there is value-added services like Sysdig or other partners with Red Hat that have solutions that you may want to apply into the environment. And so, for instance, here I'll just show you Sysdig. We have what we call the Sysdig agent operator. You can think about this as a way to kind of single command, boom, run, and Sysdig is deployed a single agent per node in your cluster, and we immediately start discovering and everything, understanding what's going on in your environment. Similarly, we talked about Falco, so there's a Falco operator as well, and other partners across all of these different categories. So they've done a great job of sort of curating solutions for you in a catalog, so to speak, if you will, at Operator Hub, and you can even outside of OpenShift itself, you can go, I think Dave, it's operatorhub.io or something like that, where they can go see all of these things.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's do this. Let's jump over into Sysdig. And one of the immediate things here, and I actually have just a single cluster running here, but where we can kind of start for you is to give you this kind of bubbled up view or opinionated view of what's happening in this cluster. And you can see here from a very simple view, we're kind of helping you understand, are your nodes ready? How are you doing against pods, available versus desired, and so on. And then you could do things like drill further down to see what's happening with the nodes across this particular cluster, or even look into those namespaces. And the opinionated part here is anything that's experiencing issues that you potentially need to look at, like for instance, this voting app looks like we've got a little overtaxing of CPU and memory, at least in terms of what we've allocated. You can start to dive deeper into that and kind of get a picture. And this is really focused around performance and health. And maybe for this particular app, I want to see what are those workloads and which one of them is kind of giving me the heartache. And you can kind of scroll through and see here, it's probably the database seems to be the thing that's kind of taking the most. And so I might want to go work on, adding a little more capacity here or whatnot, right, to make sure that this seems more reasonable. Now, the other thing that you can do, and we talked about, right, the idea that even before we're up and running in production, we want to understand what's happened from an image scanning perspective. I can actually jump over into Sysdig Secure and kind of see the results. And in this particular case, I'm actually looking not in the CI/CD pipeline or registry, but looking inside of this particular application. Let me go up to the namespace level to kind of see inside of this namespace with all of the deployments that I have. How many images do I have? How many have passed? How many have failed? I've got some pretty big issues here where I haven't even scanned them, and yet they're running in production. So I probably want to take a look at this, go back in and kick off scanning, and use some of the policies that we have out of the box to do that. Speaking of policies, just let me show you some of these to give you an idea. And I'll open this one here that's centered around kind of scanning with the idea of being NIST compliant in mind. To give you an idea of we're again not just looking at operating system vulnerabilities, but taking it beyond that, looking at things like secrets and other protection language specific items that may be inside of your images to check those against kind of the current CVE databases in the marketplace. And then you can do things like either just get a warning. So let's say I've got something like I'm finding I don't know, exposed ports. If that happens, I want you to stop this build, right? And not let it go further, not let it go into production. Or you can just get alerted. And so there's a lot of flexibility here in terms of, what you can check against and how you can control what happens next, right? And so at the end of the day, image scanning is about protecting you and the images that you're building and putting together and the code that's inside. We talked a little bit about the idea that when we're pushed into production, we want to be able to set policies. So if we look at runtime policies, I've got a number of different ones here where they're out of the box. You can turn them on or off. And why would I do this is simply, again, the collective of the community, as well as Sysdig working with our customers, have identified some of the key things that you want to take a look at. Things like maybe sensitive info, things being touched inside of particular directories that should not be touched once that container's up and running, right? And you can see here sort of the rule and how it's encapsulated in what it's doing, right? Same thing with like terminal shell and a container. Really, if I'm putting a container in production, it should be immutable. I shouldn't have folks shelling in and doing things like running commands. And so you get kind of an idea here. You can also build your own rule set by pulling in things from a library and assigning it to something like just a particular namespace, or maybe it's the entire cluster that you want to run something against. It's super easy to set that up. We're pulling in labels, we're pulling in tags. You can very easily kind of dial in exactly where you want these things to happen, and then pick those rule sets to kind of build your own, if you will, or just use things that are out of the box. So let's say I'm that administrator and I'm sort of sitting in a security operations center, and maybe I want to be able to see, okay, what's been triggered. So this comes in, again, all on trying to help you understand how things are happening in the environment. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time hunting down issues, right? So let's say someone has ran terminal shell in a container. This triggered in the last 12 hours. We're going to tell you where. We're going to give you an idea of what was affected and which rules were violated, where it, again, happened, even down to the container and the container name. And one of the nice things here too is that, again, being able to just see the activity, and here's the point at which it happened, and we're giving an idea, and this is sort of bottoms up, of what was happening, right? Someone installed a shell and kind of got in. They did something like they downloaded a tar file, kind of unzipped it, and then at the end they tried to hide their tracks, right, by shredding the bash history. And so we can look at it from this perspective and kind of dig into each one of these things. The other thing that we're able to do is actually, again, dig even farther and even deeper by looking at the capture files that kind of encompass exactly the what happened in and around this incident. So we're opening one of those now. And again, this is the kind of forensic exercise you might want to do just to understand when these things happen. Some commands were ran, and you might be able to see a hot spot and sort of center in on that. And now I can dig in, and what you're seeing on this screen are all of the different things that were captured from a process standpoint, a file network standpoint. And again, these things would not be there if the containers have stopped and gone away and been orchestrated somewhere else, right, or scheduled somewhere else. So what Sysdig is able to help you with here is a bit of back looking into the incident in a very specific level, understand, for instance, at a deep level by clicking here, what were the modified system files, and even to go in and read at a fine grained level exactly what those files contained, by analyzing, exactly what's in the file, right? So a very effective way to do troubleshooting for containers. Now let's just jump over. We talked a little bit about monitoring, and one of the things that we can do here is obviously let you kind of build a view of your environment. Here we're looking at it from a namespace deployment, Kubernetes pod, and container standpoint. And again, I can drill in and kind of see standard metrics, but I can also do things like understand by looking at various dashboards exactly how am I doing, pods available versus desired, and so on. And there's a whole host of dashboards available out of the box for you, including the ability to kind of take a look at things like response times that are happening. I'm looking right now at this namespace for the Java app, and I've opened it, and now I'm seeing the different deployments. and getting an idea of the sort of round trip latency and round trip times here. And I can even drill down into the pod level, down into the container, and then see down to the process level inside the container. Everything seems to be great inside the container. Maybe a little bit too much latency here between, you know, the different components here and off into the back end. But what this does is help you understand kind of the construct of your microservice, the performance, whether that's response time, network traffic, and so on, and you can sort of build your own, so to speak, here. And very powerful way to do that. Or, you know, look, at the end of the day, you might just want to like interact with very specific dashboards. We talked a little bit about being able to do things around Kubernetes, and so we can leverage that to look at things like SQL Server statistics, what's happening from a connection standpoint, and everything having to do with, you know, my storage traffic, which there ain't a whole lot going on here. And at the end of the day, one of the things that you can do with Sysdig is kind of take a look at the time that something happened, not just look at the metric, but look at events that were happening around that to get an idea of when a new version was deployed. This performance thing happened, and now I got to go back and understand exactly how to fix that, or maybe I want to roll back. So there's a lot of visibility you get, whether that's interacting with dashboards, exploring your environment, looking at overviews, alerts, and so on. And so it's try to puts at your fingertips a very simple way to understand the security and the performance in and around your environment. So I think I'm gonna stop there with the demo side. I just want to leave time for questions. Let me go back into our slide set and kind of click over to here. Dave, why don't you let me pause for a second? Why don't you do a quick wrap up here before we move to the Q&A section? Is that okay?
Yeah, you bet. That was excellent. I always learn something new with Sysdig. I mean, I used to go, you know, my go-to when hacking was to shred my bash. Now I can't do that anymore. So
we're gonna catch you.
Yeah. No, it was great. So I think, yeah, just to wrap it up, you know, and Eric mentioned this earlier, is you're bringing this solution together, helping you to move the cloud quicker. You have to think about the holistic DevSecOps, and it's pretty difficult to get your hands around it. So providing a solution like Sysdig on top of Red Hat will help you manage that security risk, validate the compliance if you have regulatory compliance requirements, and then evidently or obviously help you move to the cloud quicker. We've got some resources there on the right-hand side, but I think the next slide shows those as well, along with a couple of things to take note. One is, I don't know if we talked about this, but the Red Hat Marketplace has Sysdig in it as well. So this is a relatively new offering from both Red Hat and IBM that has the ability to deploy these type of tools on top of OpenShift in really any cloud that you want. So check out Red Hat Marketplace to be able to deploy and purchase these solutions very easily. We can also provide you with the Red Hat and Sysdig Forward case study. You could do a search and sign up for it as well. And then those resources on the right-hand side there are links to things like free trials. Try.openshift.com is very slick. It's basically a way for you to go out there and choose your deployment method, and it provides you with a command line tool and access for 60 days, I believe it is, a free trial for OpenShift on any one of the platforms that we provide. And then you can go out and learn all about OpenShift, openshift.com/learn as well. So those are sort of the call to action there. But yeah, hey, Charlene.
Hey.
There you are.
All right. You guys are ready for questions, I hope.
We are.
We are.
All right, great. So we have about 7 minutes or so for question and answer period. If you have a question for either Dave or Eric, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. Let's go ahead and dive into what we've got. First one, what are the top things to look at when troubleshooting OpenShift?
Boy, that could be either you or me, Dave. What do you think?
How about both of you?
Yeah, I can take it from a from an OpenShift platform perspective, and then Eric, if you want to jump in with Sysdig, that'd be
Sure.
tremendous. But yeah, I would say it all depends. I mean, OpenShift is a pretty large platform, so depending on what you're talking about, either installation or things like registry, DNS, service mesh, maybe you're trying to upgrade something, or you're trying to troubleshoot your app. There's a lot there. I would say the great thing about Red Hat is we've got a lot of this information documented. So at our customer portal, access.redhat.com, there's a bunch of different troubleshooting guides. Specifically, for example, there's a troubleshooting guide for DNS, for the image registry operator, for the cluster network operator. So you can take a look at those. My history, I was an app developer, so I was constantly in the pod logs, looking at what was going on between my pods and the connections with others. I'm sure there's a lot better ways to do that visually with Sysdig, but yeah, I would take a look at the customer portal, because one of the great things about Red Hat is we provide that support mechanism for your Kubernetes installations.
Yeah, as I say, some of the things we surface at Sysdig, it's like, okay, you do want to keep an eye on the Kubernetes control plane, so things like the Kube API server and scheduler, etcd, all that, things that you've mentioned. Obviously, then, that's all about the health of the cluster, right? And Prometheus can help you with that. Sysdig can help you with that. Obviously, then there's the services and apps themselves. A lot of times the answer here is like, hey, start with the golden signals. Well, what are those? That's like, what is the traffic happening? What's the latency you're experiencing? What kind of errors are you seeing, right? And then, is it saturated? Is it so busy that no wonder, that I'm having issues? This is what's happening, right? So those are kind of some of the four things, the golden signals to look at. There's a lot of things, right? But those are kind of, from a Sysdig perspective, control plane, application, container, things that we would surface for you to help troubleshoot.
All right, great. Here's another good question for you. Can we install and maintain Sysdig platform in-house?
The quick answer is yes, right? So I mentioned us being a SaaS platform, which makes it super easy, but thinking of security for some of you, it's either a mandate or it's a cultural thing. Like, this is what we do, right? So yes, you can install not just the agents, but the back end, and have it running on OpenShift, by the way.
Okay, awesome. I like the tie in there.
Yeah.
So what is the license for the in-house deployment model? Is that any different?
There's really no difference. I would direct you to our pricing page. You can go to products and pricing, whether you're doing SaaS or otherwise. Now, the difference is obviously, and we do it by node being monitored, right? So if I've got a 100 node Kubernetes environment, that's what I'm doing. There's a couple different levels, kind of depending on whether you're like maximum and you're looking for a lot of every single bell and whistle, or you can get started a little simpler. So I would direct you to that pricing on our website. And then I would say the other thing is that when you're doing it on-prem, clearly there's a design element to it. We want to do it right. So there's some PS involved in terms of, hey, here's how you should install it, how you should size it, at least from the get-go and so on.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So we have about 4 minutes left for question and answer period. Actually, here's a follow-on to that question. It seems a Sysdig engine can be deployed to OpenShift version 4, but the doc online seems to indicate OpenShift 3.11. So is there a latest doc that describes the the steps to deploy Sysdig on OCP version 4 in-house?
I will take that as a follow-up. We are compatible with OCP 4. I know the person who does the doc, so I will engage and either A, find it, or B, make sure that that's there.
Jeff, I think you just got somebody in trouble.
No, thanks, Jeff. I will. I'll remember that and follow up with you.
All right, great. So next question here. How does Sysdig work with the features Red Hat already has for security?
Yeah. So it's really our goal to augment, and I think Dave was painting that picture earlier in the slides with all the different boxes. And so, maybe you're already doing Claire scanning with Quay, and that's good for you, great, right? But maybe you want to pull that and do some things with Jenkins and the CI/CD. You can use Sysdig to augment and do some of that. I think the runtime security part is and the Falco engine that we're using. That's very unique to Sysdig. And so I guess the answer for me was, you know, there are already a lot of good things, and our goal, and we actually have a great document that outlines this stuff. It's like OpenShift provides this, and above and beyond that, Sysdig can provide this. And it's going to be in the categories of things that I described during the session. And yeah, I think that's called the security guide for OpenShift. So you can go look for that, or I'll send it.
All right, great. I think we have time for one more here. Let's see. Can Sysdig scan issues down to the code level?
Yes.
Okay, well, then I guess I have time for one more question.
Yeah, give one to Dave. Come on now.
Okay, how does Sysdig and Red Hat work with AWS or other cloud providers?
Yeah, I'll take that since you've been talking a lot, Eric. So, you know, AWS is a partner of Red Hat, and we have various offerings within AWS, actually two major ones, where you could deploy OpenShift on top of AWS and have Red Hat manage that, or the second offering is have that managed by both AWS and Red Hat. So our main offering with AWS is a managed OpenShift platform, so you don't have to worry about installation, maintenance, basically take the administration part of it out of it. And then of course it's OpenShift, so obviously you can deploy Sysdig, like Eric showed, with the operator hub right on top of it.
Yeah, and so we're there. We partner with I was to say big three. It's really the big four, right? All the different cloud providers, and you have the ability to roll out Sysdig there, whether it's just a simple agent or the entire thing.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent. All right, guys. Well, we are at about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for a question and answer period. But I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. And I think we got to everybody's question. But if we didn't, please know that these guys will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in. And so they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline. Also want to remind you that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we are sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right, guys, I did mention at the top of the hour we would be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get that done. Today's winners are, drum roll please, let's see, Alan D. Congratulations, Alan D. Next winner. Eric, I'm sorry, but you're not eligible. So
I know.
You're just, you know. Next winner is Jared S. Congratulations, Jared. Our third winner today is Chris P. Congratulations, Chris. And our final winner today is Brian V. Congratulations, Brian. And guys, just check your inbox for information on receiving your $25 Amazon gift card. And if you don't see it in your inbox, please check your spam folder. Dave, Eric, thank you so much for a great presentation. Lots of really interesting information, and I love seeing all those demos. So thanks very much. Appreciate that. And thanks for your expertise and your time.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
All right, great. All right. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.